Welcome to the very first episode of our new Facebook Live web series, North Carolina and World War One. I'm with Jackson Marshall, the North Carolina Museum of History's Deputy Director and World War One historian. He's going to explain to you why we're down here, what this room is, and some information about World War One.
Well, welcome to the museum. The North Carolina Museum of History is soon to launch what is going to be about a 6,500 square foot exhibition on North Carolina and World War I. We've gone through our collection and surveyed everything we found. In fact, we've made discoveries in our collection that we honestly didn't know we had for this exhibition. And we're now staging the artifacts in this room and in several other areas within the museum to prepare for the exhibit. Our conservators are looking through the objects. We're bringing in objects from other collectors. We're collecting things for the exhibition and organizing the storyline. We've actually started construction in the gallery. Our exhibition will open in April of 2017, which is the anniversary, of course, of the United States entry into World War I. Today, we're going to focus on just a few things of the many things in this room that are being staged for the exhibition. And I thought we'd start with German helmets. People are fascinated by the German helmets. And we have pulled some that we have staged in here for the exhibition. This is, I think, what a lot of people who know anything about World War I kind of recognize as the classic German spiked helmet or Pickelhaube. The German helmet, the spiked helmet, if you commonly called, was adopted by the Prussian army as early as the 1840s. By 1895, the German army standardized this helmet for the entire unified German state. This has the Prussian plate on the front. Other German states, the Saxons, the Bavarians, others would have a different plate originally on their helmets. They were leather. Originally, the Pickelhaube had very bright colored brass plating and a very bright colored brass spike. They also had cockades on the side of the helmet, which are missing on this helmet. Often, again, those were color, had a color band on them that represented the different German states. As an example, the Prussian cockade would have a white band around it. It's not uncommon to find World War I helmets, spiked helmets, with the cockades removed because soldiers did not want color to be seen by the enemy because that was they made themselves more of a target. The leather helmet was a pattern. It was a model 1895 helmet. This is actually a 1915 model of this helmet, and the reason we know that is this is not shiny brass. It's all muted. Again, the cockades have been removed. The soldiers were trying to not be so noticeable. That shiny brass could be seen for hundreds of yards or meters, and that just made you all the more the target. So they muted this. Also, what they did in 1915 is they made this spike such that it could be removed. The reason they did that is if you were in the trenches and you wanted to take a peek over the trench line to spy on the enemy or to see what's going on over there, and you slowly lifted your head, the spike would be seen first by the enemy, and they would know, well, here comes the German's head. And the next thing they do, your head would come over the trench line and they would shoot you. So they would remove the spike so they could look actually up over the trench without warning the enemy or without telling the enemy that I'm about to poke my head up. So the spikes were often just left completely off the helmets.
So there wouldn't be a shark fin in the ocean.
Yeah, that's right. So yes, it's like a fin. You know a shark is coming when you see the fin coming through the water. Well, they don't want to be seen. Also late in the war, it's not uncommon too to find these helmets made of pressed steel or tin. The Germans ran out of leather for helmets, so they started pressing metal or tin helmets and then putting the same plates and things on that. On the battlefields today in France, you will find, again, the leather's gone, but you'll often find pieces of the metal parts of these helmets on the battlefields. They're still being plowed up every year in France and in Belgium. As you can imagine, this helmet will not stop a bullet. It's leather, and bullets will just tear right through it. Other armies, the French and the British, had cloth hats at the beginning of the war. No head protection whatsoever. The Germans wore this going into the war in 1914. They wore this helmet through 1915. They wore this helmet actually going into 1916. But realized, of course, that this is not head protection. And at that point, within trench warfare, they were catching a lot of shell fire, shrapnel balls coming down on top of them, bullets and machine guns. They needed head protection. The German Army and other armies adopted steel helmets. This is the model 1916 German Army steel helmet, or Stahlhelm. This is an incredibly strong helmet. It's far more protection for a soldier. And some records indicate that once the German Army adopted this helmet and replaced the Pickelhaube with this steel helmet, that their head wounds were reduced by as much as 70%.
Wow.
This helmet was a very strong helmet. A bullet would glance off of this, generally speaking. It was very protective of shell fragments, of shrapnel balls coming down on top of them. It was a far more protective helmet. It had a flange on the back that went down the back of the neck. It was far more protective of the head. I think the only thing that some soldiers complained about was that it was heavy, of course, because it's steel. And it was also because it looped down so low around the head, it was often hard to hear because it covered your ears, which is a good thing, but you couldn't hear things. You'll also notice that it has this gray-green finish, and that again is to make it muted within a battlefield background, whether it's dirt or whether it's woods, open field. This helmet would basically blend right in, and you wouldn't be able to see the German soldiers coming. There was this is the model 1916. They also had a model 1918, which is the variation within the strap and the lining. One thing, too, that World War I helmets are very distinctive about are these lugs on either side of the helmet. This is very distinctive. World War II German helmets that were produced for World War II did not have this. The holes through this went through the helmet, so it provided some ventilation for your head. But it also served a purpose of putting on a brow plate, and I'll show you one of those in a minute. So it served two purposes: to an extra sheet of steel called a brow plate, and also for ventilation. But this was a far better helmet than anything the Germans had up to this point. This helmet was introduced by the German Army in 1916. It was first given to the soldiers, German soldiers, on the Verdun front, because that was going to be the big German offensive in 1916. And they wanted their soldiers to have the very best equipment, the very best weapons, be the best supplied for that very important offensive against the French. So this helmet first made its appearance on the Verdun front. The French on that front were the first ones to see this helmet on German soldiers. They also brought forth other things in that Verdun offensive that were new, like the flamethrower, that completely shocked the French. So this is a far cry better than anything that they'd had beforehand. Another thing that you will see often is the same helmet, only camouflaged. It would be totally improper to see a camouflaged German helmet in World War I, like in a film production, say 1916, wearing this camouflaged helmet. That would be totally wrong. So if you ever watch a movie, a Hollywood movie or anything else that shows German camouflage helmets in 1916, you know they don't know what they're doing. this helmet, the Camouflage, was actually ordered by General Ludendorff, the German commander, in a specific order dated on July the 7th, 1918, very late in the war. And he didn't just sort of put out a word, you all paint your helmets. In typical German fashion, he sent very specific instructions about exactly how to paint the helmets. They were to use 3 colors: green, a yellow ochre, and a rust brown.
It's quite the fashion statement.
Yep. And you were to use a finger-wide border between the 3 different colors, and you were not to do it in a round fashion. You were to use sharp angles in your painting. Some of these helmets may have been factory produced and painted before they went to the soldiers. We think most of them, however, were painted by the soldiers once they got the orders. So you can imagine a German company in the trenches, under fire, waiting for food and water, waiting for ammunition, and fellas show up with buckets of paint and an order to tell you to start painting your helmets. That's probably not exactly what they wanted to see, but you will find a lot of camouflaged helmets.
And if someone didn't paint the helmet up to the right specifications, were they public
Well, I'm
enemy
sure
number
the
1?
non-commissioned officers would be angry with him for not painting the helmet correctly. Again, they were given the 3 colors of paint or 4 colors of paint. They were told, paint it. Now, there is no set one design. If you look at different German camouflaged helmets from World War I, they'll all be a little bit different. They'll all be personalized, but they will always have those 3 main colors with the black border. If you see a camouflaged German helmet from World War I that has different colors or does not follow General Ludendorff's orders and how it's supposed to be camouflaged, then it's a fake. It's not true. He also gave orders on them to repaint their helmets for the winter, but the war ended in November of 1918 before the winter kicked in, so the helmets were camouflaged right into the end of the war. American soldiers saw this helmet when they went into battle during the 1918 campaigns. That's why you see a lot of Americans bringing back trophies, war trophies, that are German camouflaged helmets. You have to remember, though, that in some cases, the Germans never got the paint, and they never did camouflage their helmets. So both German soldiers were wearing still both camouflage or not camouflage at the end of the war. So you may see an uncamouflaged helmet in battle in 1918, and that simply means that unit or that soldier just didn't have the paint to camouflage his helmets. This also started to craze within the American Army, and it's not uncommon to find even American helmets with camouflage on them that came from late in the war, because they were seeing what the Germans were doing. They thought it looked cool, they thought it made sense, so that if they had paint, they would also camouflage the American helmets. Okay, let's talk back about the lugs that are on the side of these helmets. Why is that there? It's for ventilation, but it was also for the brow plate.
Guys, we asked you what this was in a post at 8:30 this morning. Well, here it is.
Here it is. This is the German brow plate. And what they were thinking is that when a soldier, even wearing this new Stahlhelm, would stick his head up through a gap in the trenches, if he was a sentry trying to watch the enemy lines, he could still take a headshot. And a direct bullet hitting one of these steel helmets, if it was close enough, if the rifleman was close enough, a bullet would still penetrate this helmet if he was close enough and it hit the helmet straight on. So in order to protect the German soldier from that headshot, they came up with an extra layer of steel, basically, to put on the front of that helmet. It's got hooks in it on the side in order to attach to those lugs. And you have now an extra
Voila.
plate of steel on the helmet. That would stop a bullet. it had what's missing on this brow plate. There was a leather strap that would go around the helmet to hold the brow plate in place. I think the only disadvantage in wearing this is it makes the helmet even heavier, and all of the weight is at the very front of the helmet. It's not balanced, so you had to have a really strong neck to hold this up because it would tip your head down. Naturally, just the gravity, the weight would pull your head down, and it was probably took a great deal of effort for a German soldier to keep his head up because this is going to constantly pull his head down.
Metaphorically and literally.
Right. So they would add the brow plate onto these helmets. Often sentries carried them. Snipers would also wear that. They would also wear the helmet, the brow plate, and body armor. Again, is extra protection for the soldier. The brow plates are very rare. Some museums have them. This museum has 2 of them, both brought back by North Carolina soldiers in World War I. There are a lot of forgeries out here of brow plates. There were not as many brow plates made, certainly, as helmets. But this museum has 2 that were brought back by North Carolina veterans at the end of the war. So we know these are authentic. Now, in spite of all of this, steel helmets, and again, the British and the French also had steel helmets, their version, we'll look at those later. And the Americans adopted a copy of the British helmet. But in spite of all of this protection for a soldier that improved greatly during the war, it didn't necessarily mean that you were going to be saved by your helmet, because these are also destructible. Artillery shell fragments, shrapnel balls, machine gun bullets, and rifle rounds could penetrate these helmets if you were close enough to the enemy, or if a shell hit close enough to you. This wouldn't necessarily save you. We've got some examples that we'll talk about later here on the table of helmets from World War I that have sustained tremendous damage. This is a French helmet with bullets damage. Here's an American helmet with shrapnel ball and possibly bullet damage to the helmet. And here's the German Model 1916 Stahlhelm with some severe damage to the crown.
Wow.
And we'll come back and talk about these helmets a little more in another episode of our webcast.
Well, thank you very much, Jackson. Tune in next week, guys. We're doing it at the same time. Actually, I take that back. Next week, we're going to do it at around 4:30. But every Wednesday following this, up until the exhibit starts, we're going to have a new episode every Wednesday at 4 o'clock. So make sure you tune into it, and we'll see you next time, guys.
Yep. Thank you.